Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a podcast by Practical E-Commerce.
This is Kerry Murdoch with Practical E-Commerce. Cross-border e-commerce is booming, as is cross-border shipping. But the postage rates among countries for that shipping greatly vary. Merchants in certain countries, such as China, can ship very cheaply to U.S. consumers with rates that are unavailable to U.S. merchants. To explain it all, I'm joined today by Paul Steidler, a senior fellow with the Lexington Institute in Washington, D.C. Well, Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Kerry, it's great to be here.
Paul, we're looking forward to visiting with you about shipping, e-commerce shipping, in particular international shipping. Many listeners, e-commerce merchants that are listening to this, they're aware of a program, certainly through the U.S. Postal Service, whereby it's oftentimes cheaper for an international seller to ship into the U.S. than it is for a domestic merchant to ship across the country. I'm wondering if you could describe that program to us and tell us why that is.
Okay, well, I believe you're referring to the e-packet program from China, which is a program that the Postal Service instituted in 2010. That is really to understand programs like the e-packet and why it's far less expensive often to ship goods from foreign countries to the U.S. Than to send goods within the U.S. itself. It's important to understand something known as terminal dues. And that sounds like an arcane topic, but basically it's the international postage system that is in place that sets common rates and common standards for 192 countries around the world. And the long and the short of it is the United States is classified as a Group 1 country, meaning we're going to pay the most for goods that are shipped into the country. And for some reason, through its lobbying at this UN organization, actually, China has gotten itself designated as a Group 3 country, which really gives it a tremendous advantage in being able to ship goods from China to the United States. It costs less to send a package from Beijing to San Francisco than it does from Los Angeles to San Francisco. And this puts a number of U.S. E-commerce merchants and others at a considerable competitive disadvantage.
Does the e-packet program, does that just between the U.S. and China, or does it apply to can merchants from other countries do the same thing, not just merchants in China?
It applies primarily to the U.S. and China. It also applies to Hong Kong and some other countries. The e-packet program is something that has come under considerable criticism here in the U.S. The Postal Service has been very secretive about how the program is performing, but for example, an Office of Inspector General report found that it was losing $39 million in 2014, and it's a program that because of which really mirrors the effect of the International Terminal Dues Agreement. You can think of it almost as a derivative product of that. Just to give you an example of how negative that can be, I was speaking a couple of weeks ago with a businessman up in New Jersey. His name is Jamie Smaldone, and he has a company that sells mugs. And he has had to do some research about counterfeit products that are originating in China. And what he has found is that while it costs him $6.20 to mail the product to a different town in the United States, to get the entire counterfeit product with shipping costs less than $6 from China, with the shipping only being $1 of the component through the e-packet program. So there's tremendous cost disadvantages for him, for other e-commerce merchants, and it creates some very serious difficulties, even business survival issues for a number of different companies.
Paul, in preparing for the interview, I've read some articles, and supporters of ePacket, I think, would say something like this. They would say, certainly it hurts e-commerce merchants. That is our audience, of course. Practical E-commerce is to help e-commerce merchants. But supporters would say it hurts e-commerce merchants, but it helps consumers in the United States avail themselves to affordable goods from China, and it helps raise the Chinese economy so that the U.S. companies can sell their products into China. They say, in other words, that the broader public policy good of helping consumers is more important than a narrower outlook of protecting merchants. I think is what they would say. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that there's some truth in that, but I think that's fundamentally short-sighted. If we take a step back, the U.S. Postal Service, as a result of the terminal dues system, loses about $135 million a year on international mail. And there's really no way to fix that because this is governed by an international treaty. So that money needs to be made up by postal consumers. It needs to be made up by consumers here in the U.S. In the form of either, reduced service or higher postal rates. Another thing I would point out is consumers benefit when there is sustained long-term competition between different companies. And if we have cases like that involving the mug company that I just referenced, if companies start to get driven out of business because the determining factor is the shipping costs, that is, especially over the long run, not beneficial for consumers. There are fewer goods, there are fewer competitors for new goods that are out there. So, and I would also add that the loss of U.S. e-commerce businesses also has very high costs in terms of lower tax revenues and in terms of less jobs and prosperity here at home. So at the end of the day, I think what folks want is a system of fairness where you're going to have the cost reflected in what the reality is to send a good from Beijing to San Francisco or from San Francisco to Los Angeles, that we not have distorted, unfair playing fields. If we just level the playing field, that will allow the chips to fall where they may and for businesses to be most efficient and, I think, provide the maximum benefits to consumers.
So U.S. merchants can't ship into China in a similar inexpensive way, the way that China merchants ship into the U.S.? Is that right?
That's correct. It is dirt cheap for China to ship goods to the United States. And because of the fact that China has gotten itself classified, and this gets a little into the weeds here, but as a Tier 3 company under the international UPU postal system, They are in a grouping with countries like Botswana, Costa Rica, and Kazakhstan, which means they are going to have more favorable shipping costs. The thinking behind the treaty is that Tier 1 companies like the United States and the industrial companies of the world should pay more of the postal costs, that should be on them. The poorer countries should pay less. But in China's case, even though they're the second largest economy in the world, and by most measures have a very roaring successful economy, they're being treated like a third world country under the international postal system and getting a lot of subsidies, which are coming at the cost of American postal consumers and anybody else who uses the post office's services, and really giving them a significant e-commerce advantage.
So is the issue here not so much the international policy of terminal dues, if I could paraphrase what you're explaining to us, Paul, the issue is not so much the policy of terminal dues, it's the classification that China has within that policy. Is that what you're saying?
That's a big part of it. The terminal dues system, the entire terminal dues system should be looked at. In fact, it's something that began to get developed in 1969, before the age of e-commerce, before the age of international shipping. But the mere fact that China is treated as a Group 3 country gives it an enormous advantage. But even if you were to get China into the Group 1 setting, which would address a good deal of the problem, you still have the issue of rates being unbalanced, and I think it just behooves us in an age of e-commerce to take a fresh look at how we're going to structure international shipping rates.
When will that? How does that review process work? So China is Group 3. When will that be looked at next?
Well, it's looked at continuously. The Universal Postal Union is actually an arm of the United Nations that's based in Bern, Switzerland. And every 4 years, they adopt a new program that are going to govern what the terminal dues are going to be for 4 years ahead, and which designate companies into different tiers, different classifications.
Okay.
So the new system is going to kick in effective January the 1st of 2018, and there is going to be a little bit of relief there in that it's going to cost approximately 17% more to send a package from China to the U.S. And that increase, actually 13%, that 13% increase will take place each of the next 4 years. But even given that, the disparities are so huge at this point that it is not going to be straightened out unless and until there's a bilateral agreement that the U.S. reaches with China on its postal policy.
You've explained that the e-packet policy, it's for relatively small packages, 4.4 pounds, I think is what it is, which, by the way, I noticed I was looking, 4.4 pounds is about what a MacBook Pro weighs. A 15-inch MacBook Pro weighs almost 4.5 pounds. So it's just for, as I understand it, it's just for that weight and lighter. It also takes a fair amount of time, as I understand it, to ship goods under this program from China to the U.S. My question for you is, while the policy may be unfair, is it that big a deal, given those two restrictions, the weight restriction and the fact that it's relatively slow?
The short answer is yes, it is a big deal. And in fact, under one of the attractive features of the e-packet system for recipients is you can track online where the package is going to be. So if you're going to be waiting for a week and a half or so, you can see if it's in Hawaii, Los Angeles, wherever the package is, wherever the package is en route. And I'm sorry, I think I forgot the first part of your question there, Kerry.
So it's just weight. It's a relatively small weight. It's 4.4 pounds. 4.5 pounds. I don't know what the average weight, the average e-commerce shipment weighs, but that's reasonably small. So, given the weight restriction, does that provide some relief for U.S. merchants that are trying to compete?
It provides some, but there's still there's still a good deal of very expensive products that can be shipped for under 4.4 pounds. The 2 kilogram limit under the UPU. For example, sunglasses. You might be able to get some pairs that in the U.S. would be a couple of $100s, but much cheaper if they are shipped in that way. A number of electronic parts can be quite expensive, but not weigh that much. So it's the small, higher-priced products that are of the greatest concern. But even the case of the mug company in New Jersey, shows how problematic this can be.
Let's switch gears just for a second. Talk about you and the organization that you're with. You're a senior fellow at the Lexington Institute in Washington, D.C., which is a public policy think tank. Could you tell us about the Lexington Institute and why it is that you're interested in shipping, e-commerce shipping, international shipping?
Yes, and thank you for that question, Kerry. We were established in 1998. Our mission is to inform, educate, and shape the public debate on issues that are of central importance to the future of democracy. And along those lines, we believe that logistics and related to that, the expansion of e-commerce, which is fundamentally changing the way most business is done in the U.S. and the world, is a very important topic to study. So, we issue studies, research reports. We have a number of forums on Capitol Hill and in other settings. And for additional information, people can visit our website, lexingtoninstitute.org.
You cited, Paul, the example of the merchant in New Jersey that sells mugs who has suffered under the e-packet policy. Could you give us other examples? Any other companies come to mind that are incurring material losses because of e-packet?
Yes. In fact, the Washington Post did an in-depth story about the title is "The Postal Service is Losing Millions a Year to Help You Buy Cheap Stuff from China." And they talked about a internet entrepreneur, former Fortune 500 company executive who was selling boats and toys. These are toy boats, as well as a variety of toys and other items online, and his business has been fundamentally undercut by the e-packet, by the lower rates from China. The Postal Service is not able to get currently more than $1.50 for delivering a 1-pound package from a courier, and this has enabled the Chinese to make various inroads, not only with mugs and toys, but a variety of different business lines, and really put them in a strong position as e-commerce continues to expand at such strong rates.
Paul, we have just another minute or two left. Anything else on your mind today?
Yes, I would say this is an issue that folks should be on the lookout for. For example, Congressman Marchant from Texas has recently raised the issue with Secretary Tillerson and the Postmaster General, asking that they go back to the drawing board on the terminal dues programs that are in place. And it's something very important to pay attention to. It affects the competitive position of American businesses. It's gotten to the point where it's now on the radar screen of policymakers in Washington. I would just say stay tuned. I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about the issue. And it's also worthwhile for merchants to take a look at the issue to see how they are impacted by it competitively and to learn more about it and to chime in and just let policymakers know if they are impacted by this, how they are impacted. There's, as I say, additional information on our website, lexingtoninstitute.org, about the dynamics of this issue. And I would just encourage people to stay tuned because it's a big deal. It's largely been under the radar screen, but it's coming out into the public domain.
Okay. Well, I've been visiting with Paul Steidler. Paul is Senior Fellow at the Lexington Institute, which is a public policy think tank in Washington, D.C. As Paul just mentioned, that website is lexingtoninstitute.org, lexingtoninstitute.org. And Paul Steidler, I want to thank you for your time today, sir.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. It's been a pleasure and an honor.